I'm definitely positive that in a modern context, we have plenty of disagreement about what the right balance of each attitude is. But let's say a sort of chaotic discussion about it is much better than a bad answer of a very rigid system.
But if you trace discourse back or look at the way these discussions have played out for the last 100 years and you look at the political results, especially given where we are at now, that suggests that that chaotic discussion hasn't led to a positive or moral outcome, and you have to ask serious questions about why that is.
Yes.
That again, I would go back to saying that is an expression of modernity being unable to reconcile its own problems, because it gives well, people equal rights, freedom of speech, even though that doesn't really exist in this country. But anyway, when you have a communicative public sphere, where people can say what they think and have and facilitate or engender democratic outcomes, it doesn't mean the right outcome is always going to result.
Yes.
And the onus on top of that is, again, always on the person who's defending a certain structure to explain why that thing should persist. So the conservative always loses in these debates as well.
Okay, so I'm not exactly certain about this, because for me, politics is a comparative science. So I could be arguing in favor of, let's say, a significant part of the status quo while wanting to part with another bit. That makes me a bit, let's say, vulnerable to the critic in the first case, because when people attack, it's very easy to attack something. It's far more difficult to defend it. But this doesn't mean that the critic gives a positive alternative.
No, it doesn't.
So in that respect, it is not that if, for instance, a particular form of a particular institution yields bad results and people judge it, it doesn't mean that other contrary institutions give better results necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
So just by criticizing a view, you're not giving something positive. And this, I think this is something that I find a bit unsatisfactory with critical theory. Tell me if you think I'm uncharitable, but for me, critical theory just criticizes.
Yes, but has it or has
people,
it not?
And doesn't give.
No, you're quite right, but
positive.
has it or has it not been extremely effective politically? It has run amok around liberals for decades, because it is an absolutely irrefutable epistemology. Criticizing something by using its presuppositions against itself is a guaranteed victory for critical theorists, because they literally say nothing. But that is what modernity facilitates. It's that constant questioning of revision of self-knowledge. Like, it's critical theory, if anything, is modernity par excellence in that regard. So my concern is, how do you reconcile things that we know that we value and want to preserve with that thing that modernity knowingly encourages? And I don't think that there is an objective way that a conservative can make a case against someone as rationalistic as a critical theorist, because they've literally got that Kantian innate knowledge to run amok around any argument that's presented. Everything's a power structure.
The thing is that that's easy.
Yes, but it's effective, and it is used in sophistical ways.
Okay, so question: how are we going to react against it? Because the thing is, if we fall onto this trap of criticizing for criticism's sake,
yes,
without putting anything positive in advance forward, just society will disintegrate.
Yes.
So when we see this, what should we do? Should we just speed up? Or should we say, no, listen, we need to think a bit better, and we need to confront the critical theories.
This is the big question.
With their lack of positivity. So every time people start saying things about, the whole structure is wrong, and ask them, no, what is the alternative? I know that this is an age-old question that many people ask, especially when they are dealing with utopians. But it's a question that is also effective, because it shows that they don't have anything positive. So they are interested in society disintegrating. So when it comes, so my, let's say, reaction to this is not to say that, okay, they won. what I want to do is I want to defend the good aspects of of Western society.
Yes.
And I would not rush to say that because modernity for me is modern culture. It's the way of life. It's an incredibly complex thing. I wouldn't rush to say that the entirety of modern culture should be rejected because some people who want to reject it are effective in getting people.
There are some forms that should definitely be rejected.
Yes, but
only
some
fans.
forms.
You can purge that. I mean, get rid of that straight away.
Okay, yeah, but some forms. There is such a thing as throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and I want to avoid this. Do you think that's
again? It still feels like you're falling into the same trap, though. I mean, I'll start by answering the original question. What do we do without the perpetual whingers, right? Those who keep making immutable and unprovable claims about lived experience and using that as a means of explaining why we should reconstruct everything to accommodate those people. There is only one way you can argue. Actually, no, there are two ways you can argue against those people. The first is not to argue and just make them shut up by force, but that's practically not going to work because then they would look like the moral actors, right? The second is to use critical theory against itself, as I have been doing consistently. And the very reason I get angry, for example, at people like James Lindsay and some jumped up grammar school boys as well, is precisely because they try to attribute all of this to communism and Marxist dialectics, when Marxist dialectics, in fact, actually is a way of exposing power structures and pointing out people who are doing things for irrational reasons. Because ultimately it's nothing other than just an attempt at dominance. And what the critical theorists are doing at the moment is making absurd claims on the grounds of things like lived experience. I mean, they've got an entire science behind these, or pseudoscience, behind all of these ideas that they believe. The reason why society keeps making concessions to these people is because they run amok around them. They allow them to sound cleverer than they are, and then they legislate for it. I mean, look at the state of the Conservative Party in Britain. They don't have a clue that they're being run these people are run. They were quite literally people like that in the Conservative Party are advocating for these ideas. I mean, they've got their own LGBTQ plus whatever it is in the party, in the Conservative Party. I mean, how on earth can you work within an apparently liberal common law system when you don't even have a party that is in favour of conservation?
Okay. Yeah.
But that is the direct result, I'm afraid, of modernity being unable to stipulate the limits.
Okay. I think you are throwing a lot of things into the table, and I can't give you a response. Okay. So
yeah, a lot of that was contemporaneous. I'm sorry.
No. By all means, I really welcome it, and I'm really enjoying our discussion. But I think it's important to take one step at a time. So you talked about Marxist dialectics, the critical theory, using critical theory against itself. So for me, let's say we are faced with a particular problem right now. We're faced with people who have, let's say, an unprecedented reach, especially given social media, who are really hellbent on destroying Western society by let's say, blaming everything that is bad to the institutions of Western society, such as, for instance, the rule of law, such as the police. So, for instance, I'm thinking of the BLM movement. The response was defund the police. I mean, how on earth is going to make people more secure?
No.
Okay? So I'm saying that when we have things like that, what's the response? Okay, the response seems to me to tell people and show to people that, no, listen, I'm not going to destroy my house because someone else wants me to destroy my house and someone else wants to destroy it. I'm going to defend my house. Now, my house is not perfect. I will try and find the imperfections of my house and solve them. But I want to conserve my house.
Yes.
And the thing is that when we think this way, it seems to me that we are a bit more likely to think in a piecemeal fashion. So, for instance, it seems to me that a lot of our discussions, and in many cases where I hear critics about modernity, it seems to me that there is a sort of holistic tendency. What do I mean by that? I'm not, maybe it's not yours, and tell me if it's not. But tell me also if you think that many people fall into this mindset where they say that the whole is always responsible for each and every part. And to understand social phenomenon, we need to understand the culture. And for each and every social phenomenon, it is the entire culture that is to blame. And if there are social phenomena that are not good, it's the whole culture that is to blame, and is the whole culture that should be rejected. Now, to people who think like that, and there are many, I'm saying, what is your alternative? And second, you are basically not rejecting modernity in any way. You're recreating it.
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
Recreating it, because the main idea of modernity is the main idea of philosophy. You use reason in order to subject personal and social aspects of our lives to criticism, evaluate them, and improve them. So there are many people nowadays who are saying, on the one hand, modernity should be rejected. Why? Because there are practices that do not stand to scrutiny. That's what the spirit of modernity is about. Using reason to understand institutions and habits of subject them to rational idea and changing them.
Yes, but you know what they would say to that? They would say, but that's not the right form of reason. Like, this is critical theorists work with this epistemic distinction or differentiation between proper reason and the understanding. That standard, Hegelian or Kantian differentiation, where the understanding is knowledge understood through formal categories, and then you've got reason, which is like the essence of the human spirit. They can quite easily say, but ultimately you may think that you're pursuing reason, but in fact this is a form of reason that is an expression of domination, and you think this because you have white privilege or male privilege or whatever, and you are wrong. And then of course they've got this infinite supply of reasons to back that up, which then bamboozles the opponent.
Okay, just because they can give a response doesn't make it a good response.
Oh, it's not, but people concede to them, and that's precisely what concerns me. There was a very easy way to deal with Black Lives Matter in the United States and the UK, and that's simply enforce the law. They were criminals. They were rioters. I mean, they were mugging people in the street, waking people up at night. They have all the legal instruments that they need to make the police or even the army do their jobs properly. They just chose not to enforce it properly, because they were too scared of the political consequences. I'm sympathetic to why they were scared, but they should still have enforced it to quash it as quickly as they can, because it was such a huge movement, and there quite clearly were revolutionaries driving it. Whether you call those people Marxists or not, there's no question that there was revolutionary sentiment underwriting it. And what purpose or what legitimacy does a state have unless it has the right to ensure that it persists? Like, that in itself is a justification for why you should use force to stop what they're doing. Like that. So that would have been the way to deal with Black Lives Matter. And there's nothing in contradiction with that. Doesn't stand in contradiction with the concept of modernity. I readily accept. But where modernity is a guilty party in this, again, can be traced back to the fact that these are still the ideas that Black Lives Matter and groups like them subscribe to is still consistent with the original nebulous Enlightenment idea of self-knowledge, because it is that arbitrary.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.